Welcome to this explainer. Today we are going to unpack one of the absolute most fascinating illusions in all of human history, and that is money. We're going to explore how human psychology and collective belief essentially created the concept of money completely out of thin air. We're tracing this incredible journey from trading literal cows all the way to the 1971 Nixon shock and finally right up to today's landscape of digital assets. It is a wild ride of human imagination, so let's get right into it.
Okay, think about gold for a second. You hear about it constantly in finance, right? But look at how we actually use the stuff. Nearly half of it, 45%, is literally just used for decoration and jewelry. You know, your necklaces, earrings, giant solid gold statues. A super small slice goes to industry, like teeth fillings or the electronics inside your phone. But then a massive portion of all this shiny metal simply sits in heavily guarded bank vaults, mostly in New York and London, just in the form of heavy bars gathering dust.
And here is something absolutely wild about the sheer physical reality of gold's scarcity. If you gathered every single piece of this shiny stardust that humans have ever pulled out of the earth since the literal dawn of civilization and put it all in one place, it would all fit into one surprisingly compact cube. You could drop it right in the middle of Washington, D.C., and it honestly wouldn't even look that overwhelmingly massive, yet this relatively tiny amount of metal has driven the entire global economy for centuries. To understand why governments and regular investors are suddenly going on a massive gold buying spree again today, we have to look at the first psychological leap, from cows to metal.
Think about early societies. Before money, we traded items that were actually useful, like cows. Cows are great. They feed you, and they can literally walk themselves to the market. But they also spoil, they die, and you can't exactly chop off a quarter of a cow to buy some bread, right? So we made a leap. We went from trading highly practical but flawed items like livestock to trading a shiny metal that doesn't feed or shelter us at all. Gold has almost zero intrinsic utility for our actual survival. But it is wonderfully durable, it never ever rusts, it's super easy to split up, and frankly, humans just really love shiny things.
So it really all boils down to one incredibly human ingredient: belief. If everyone collectively trusts that this unrusting, practically useless metal has value, well, suddenly you can trade it for wheat, or salt, or fabric, literally anywhere in the world. Gold becomes valuable not because of what it actually does, but because of what we collectively believe it means. We literally transformed a shiny rock into a universal system of economic power.
And this collective belief, it wasn't just some quiet, polite agreement. It sparked an intense, historical mania. When the Spanish arrived in the Americas back in 1519 and saw the Aztecs using gold purely for decoration, their economic belief in the metal drove them to brutal conquest. It's perfectly captured by this conqueror's quote about having a disease of the heart. This exact same fever fueled all those wild myths of pirates bearing treasure chests, and it caused the chaotic, intoxicating rush of desperate people during the 1849 gold rush. Our belief literally made people do extraordinary and reckless things.
Which brings us to our next big shift, the leap to paper and believing in banks. Because let's be real, hauling heavy metal around everywhere wasn't exactly great for a rapidly growing global economy. So instead of physically carrying heavy, shiny metal to make large trades, we shifted our belief to banks. The process was super simple. You deposit your physical gold into a bank vault. In return, they hand you a paper banknote, which is basically just a giant IOU. You then go out and trade that completely worthless piece of paper, trusting completely that whoever ends up holding it can walk back into that exact bank and redeem it for the physical gold. We abstracted our belief entirely from metal to paper.
By the early 1900s, this psychological bargain had evolved into the famous gold standard. This created a firm, finite baseline for the United States and other major global economies. Under this system, something like $20 was pegged exactly to 1 physical ounce of gold. Now, because there is only a finite amount of gold in the world, this standard meant the amount of paper money floating around out there was physically limited by the actual metals sitting locked up in the vaults.
But, as you can probably guess, humans struggled to adapt to this rigid system. That brings us to the rise of fiat and trusting the government.
The breaking point took a while. People would occasionally get spooked, which led to these massive financial panics where everyone rushed the banks to withdraw their physical gold all at the same time. To stop these panics, the U.S. centralized power by creating the Federal Reserve in 1913 to help manage the money supply. We enjoyed the Roaring '20s boom, but then the Great Depression hit in the 1930s and we saw massive, devastating bank runs. The real problem here, the Fed couldn't just print more money to stimulate the economy because they were strictly legally constrained by the finite supply of physical gold in their vaults.
Now, economists love to fiercely debate the Federal Reserve's role during this era. Some critics argue the Fed artificially amplified the 1920s boom by keeping credit way too abundant. Others argue they actively worsened the Great Depression because, terrified of running out of physical gold, they actually hiked interest rates instead of lowering them to help people out. But honestly, regardless of which side of that debate you fall on, the ultimate result was identical. In 1933, the government realized they desperately needed more flexibility in a crisis, so FDR literally recalled the citizens' gold, just demanded it back.
And this shift brings us to fiat money. This is a massive, massive mental abstraction. Our money was no longer backed by finite metal. Fiat literally just means it has value by government decree, because they said so. We took our collective belief in a shiny metal, and we transferred all of it directly into a collective belief in the government's ability to carefully manage the economy and keep that little piece of paper valuable.
Now, this didn't happen globally all at once. Fast forward to 1944 at Bretton Woods, the world basically agreed to accept the US dollar as the global currency, but specifically because the US promised foreign governments, hey, your dollars are still totally backed by gold at $35 an ounce. But by the 1960s, countries like France and Germany looked around, realized the US was printing way too many dollars, and they called our bluff. They demanded their physical gold back. Facing a rapidly draining vault, President Nixon completely severed the dollar from gold in 1971. The golden tether was officially cut forever.
Which brings us right into the modern era. Let's look at why gold is suddenly back in focus, and the current crisis of faith.
Today, so much of the global economy relies entirely on a small group of people in a fancy white building in Washington, D.C., pulling proverbial levers to manage the dollar's value. And there are two very distinct sides to this modern debate. Proponents argue this system is absolutely essential. It allows us to quickly recover from massive crises like 2008 or the COVID-19 pandemic by injecting money exactly when we need it. Skeptics, on the other hand, argue this system creates out-of-control inflation, causes long-term instability, and places way too much unchecked power in an agency that totally lacks free market consequences.
The big takeaway here is that fiat money only works when trust is absolute. But recently, we are seeing clear signs of that trust cracking. Rival nations are actively trying to bypass or outright replace the US dollar. We're seeing real economic shocks, like sudden tariffs, that spark deep, widespread fears of inflation. And we're seeing unprecedented political attacks threatening the Federal Reserve's independence. All of this combined makes people deeply, deeply nervous about their psychological bargain with the government. And how we respond to that fear reveals a truly fascinating quirk of human nature. When our trust in the government's fiat system starts to wane, we immediately look for alternatives that don't rely on central authorities. We step backward on our psychological timeline, rushing toward physical gold, that shiny, durable metal we've trusted for millennia as a safe haven. But incredibly, we are also stepping forward. We're exploring entirely new digital alternatives, like Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, hoping technology and math can provide the trust that governments are currently losing.
So what does this all mean? From livestock to shiny stardust, from paper IOUs to digital code, money has literally never been about the physical object itself. It has always been an illusion built entirely on our collective belief. So as traditional trust wavers and we step into this wild new era, what will we choose to put our faith in next? Thank you so much for exploring this with us.